Welcome to the deep dive. It is Tuesday.
March 10th.
Right, March 10th, 2026, and we are just incredibly glad you're sitting down with us today. Because if you've glanced at a screen or a newspaper or even just caught a fragment of a conversation at the coffee shop this week, you know the atmosphere right now is heavy.
It's extremely heavy. It's palpable.
It really is. We are currently on day 11 of a massive, rapidly escalating global conflict. And the sheer volume of information pouring out of the Middle East and echoing across global markets is just staggering.
Yeah.
It's the kind of news cycle that makes you want to just turn off your phone entirely and walk away.
Which is a completely natural reaction.
Yeah.
It really is entirely understandable to feel a sense of vertigo looking at the current geopolitical landscape.
Absolutely.
When you have dozens of live feeds throwing red alert push notifications at you every single hour, the human brain just kind of, well, the natural reaction is to get lost in the panic of the moment.
Which is exactly why we're here. Our mission today is to cut through that noise for you. We are tracking 40 monitored global events. These are pulled from 36 live data feeds, and we have distilled them all down from a single, highly critical source today.
The Ping AI blog's daily intel brief.
Exactly. And our approach today is going to be different. We're going to step back from that raw feed.
Right. We're going to examine not just what is happening on the ground, but the mechanics behind why it matters.
How these seemingly isolated events, from a missile strike in the desert to a delayed flight in Europe, are deeply, just inextricably connected.
Because mapping that broader context is really the only way we navigate this without succumbing to complete information overload.
So the shadow hanging over all of this data, the real gravitational center of today's deep dive, is Operation Epic Fury.
Yeah?
This is the massive ongoing U.S. and Israeli air campaign directed against Iran. Over the next hour, we are going to look at the hard numbers of this campaign.
The asymmetric retaliations.
Right. And the bleeding secondary theaters in places like Lebanon. And we're even going to get into how a severe blizzard currently blanketing the Pacific Northwest ties into this incredibly fragile global web.
It's all connected.
It is. But the central question we really want you to keep in the back of your mind as we pull these threads together is this. With global tensions at an absolute boiling point, what is the path forward?
That's the core of it.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start with the sheer unprecedented scale of Operation Epic Fury.
The scale is really the only place to begin, because the numbers we're looking at here indicate that we've officially moved past the era of shadow wars.
The proxy skirmishes are over.
Exactly. We're looking at a fundamental rewiring of Middle Eastern security architecture right now.
Let me just lay out the statistics we are pulling from the Ping AI intel brief, because they are staggering. Since Operation Epic Fury launched in late February, U.S. and Israeli forces have executed over 3,000 precision strikes.
3,000.
Just let that number sink in for a second for you listening. 3,000 strikes, and we are only on day 11.
To put that in perspective, that is a relentless, around-the-clock sortie generation. You are talking about waves of aircraft and standoff munitions operating continuously.
The targets listed in the brief are incredibly specific, too. Iranian military infrastructure, nuclear sites, and critical oil facilities.
Right.
The brief specifically highlights a heavy concentration of strikes targeting Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC bases, right in the heart of Tehran.
Which is huge. Hitting IRGC command nodes within the capital itself is a massive escalation.
It is.
And the human cost reflects the intensity of that bombardment. The Iranian Red Crescent is reporting over 1,200 fatalities since February 28th.
A number that they note includes military personnel.
Right. But looking at this through a strictly operational lens, the intelligence brief points to a truly shocking metric. Open source assessments are currently estimating a 70 to 80% degradation of Tehran's missile and drone arsenal.
I really have to pause on that number. 70 to 80% in 11 days.
It's massive.
I was looking at this assessment earlier, and I just have to ask, how reliable is open source intelligence on something like this? I mean, Iran has spent the better part of 3 decades burying its most critical ballistic missile infrastructure deep inside mountains.
Deep subterranean silos.
Right. So can satellite imagery and crater counting really confirm that 4/5 of their capability is just gone? Aren't we risking a severe underestimation of what they might still have hidden?
That is the exact right question to ask. And it's the crucial caveat to this entire assessment. Open source intelligence relies on commercial satellite imagery Thermal signatures intercepted logistics communications.
So they're seeing the surface level stuff.
Exactly. When they say an 80% degradation, they are primarily talking about known, mapped, above-ground launch sites, storage depots, and the manufacturing facilities that build the drones.
The stuff you can see from orbit.
Right. You are absolutely correct that the deep subterranean silo complexes are much harder to assess. However, even if that 80% figure is slightly optimistic,
I'd say it's 60%.
even then, the functional impact remains devastating. What this represents is a total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
For years, the conflict between these powers has been a shadow war. It was fought through proxy militias in third-party countries, through cyber attacks on power grids.
Maritime sabotage with plausible deniability.
Exactly. This operation strips away the deniability entirely. It is a direct great power confrontation.
And the brief outlines the strategic goal here very clearly. The U.S. and Israel are attempting to neutralize Iran's nuclear threshold capabilities while simultaneously shattering its ability to project power across the region.
Shattering is the right word.
And when we talk about nuclear threshold, we need to be clear about what that actually means. We aren't necessarily talking about taking out a fully assembled nuclear weapons sitting on a launch pad somewhere.
No, not at all.
It is about destroying the infrastructure. The centrifuge cascades, the heavy water facilities, the scientific command centers. The goal is to drastically extend the breakout time required to enrich uranium to weapons grade.
Precisely. They are pushing the timeline back. They want to ensure that if Tehran decided to make a sprint for a bomb, it would take them months or years rather than weeks.
Giving the international community ample time to respond.
Right.
I was trying to visualize what losing the vast majority of your conventional arsenal in just over a week actually looks like from a strategic standpoint. And the best way I can think to describe it to you listening is to imagine sitting down for a really high-stakes chess match.
Okay.
But in the opening minutes of the game, before you've even had a chance to develop your board or execute your opening strategy, your opponent just reaches across the table and physically removes your queen, your rooks, and your knights.
It takes them off the board.
Just gone. You are left staring at a board with pawns and maybe a bishop, while your opponent is still playing with their full complement of pieces.
That is a great way to look at it.
That massive, sudden strategic deficit is what Tehran's military planners are currently waking up to.
It forces a complete recalculation on their end. They have been stripped of their primary conventional deterrent. The missiles and drones were their counterweight to the sheer air superiority of the U.S. and Israel.
Right.
Without them, they cannot win a conventional piece-for-piece exchange. They just can't.
But I want to tie this directly back to you, the listener, because it is very easy to look at a map, see fires burning halfway across the world, and think, well, that is a tragedy. But it doesn't affect my morning commute.
It always does.
It does. The brief specifically notes the targeting of Iranian oil infrastructure. And that is where the geopolitical meets the personal. When you strike oil extraction and refining facilities in one of the world's major producing regions, the shockwaves are instantaneous.
They hit the global energy markets immediately.
Right. It means the price of a barrel of crude skyrockets, which means the gas pump gets more expensive, which means the cost of putting groceries on a freight truck goes up.
Which feeds directly into inflation.
Exactly. It acts as an instant, unavoidable tax on the entire global economy.
Which brings us to the immediate strategic risk moving forward. If we accept the premise that Tehran's conventional military is severely degraded, and we use your chess analogy where they've lost their major pieces.
What does a cornered adversary do?
Exactly. The intelligence brief speculates that this massive deficit pushes Iran away from direct military confrontation and entirely toward asymmetric retaliation.
Because they have to.
Right. If you can't match the air campaign, you have to change the rules of the game. You have to strike where your opponent is spread thin, where they are politically vulnerable, and where the economic pain is highest.
And we're already seeing the leading edge of that asymmetric strategy.
Which brings us to the counter moves on day 11.
Yes.
Iran did not simply absorb a 3,000 strike campaign without responding. They launched a massive, coordinated missile salvo. But the geography of this retaliation is what is truly alarming here.
They didn't just aim at Israel. No. The intel brief details that IRGC drone strikes also targeted the United States Embassy compound in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, causing significant fires on the compound.
And at the same time,
they struck the Al Harir U.S. military base in Erbil, which is located in the Kurdistan region of Iraq.
the choice of those specific targets is highly calculated and deeply troubling.
Why those two?
Well, by striking Riyadh and Erbil, Tehran is intentionally expanding the geographic footprint of the danger. They are daring the United States to defend its assets inside the borders of allied nations.
The Al Harir base in Erbil has long been a strategic hub for U.S. operations in the region.
Right. Hitting it proves they can still reach critical American logistical nodes.
Right.
But the strike on the embassy compound in Riyadh is even more complex.
Because it actively pulls Saudi Arabia into the crossfire.
Exactly. The Saudi-U.S. relationship is a cornerstone of regional security, but it's also complex. By forcing a scenario where Iranian drones are exploding inside the Saudi capital, even if they are technically aimed at an American compound, Iran is testing the resilience of that alliance.
They're sending a message.
They are sending a message to the Gulf states. Your alignment with Washington makes you a target.
And the multinational defense web gets even more complicated when you look at the trajectory of the missiles aimed at Israel. The Ping AI brief notes that some of those Iranian missiles were intercepted by NATO defense systems operating over Turkish airspace.
Over Turkey.
Yeah. The interception scattered debris across the region. So now you have a scenario where NATO infrastructure, Turkish sovereign airspace, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq are all physically entangled in the kinetic reality of these weapons.
This is a severe stress test for multinational alliances. When a NATO asset intercepts a missile over Turkey, it brushes dangerously close to the tripwire of collective defense agreements.
Article 5 territory.
It's getting too close for comfort. Furthermore, while the interceptions over Riyadh averted a catastrophic mass casualty event at the embassy, the overall situation is degrading rapidly. The intelligence brief highlights that the U.S. State Department has issued severe citizen evacuation warnings across multiple countries in the region.
Which is never a precautionary measure taken lightly.
No, it is a massive flashing red indicator. A non-combatant evacuation operation is incredibly resource-intensive.
It's a huge logistical nightmare.
Exactly. When a government signals this kind of preemptive positioning, it means the military intelligence apparatus has cleared the board and determined that the violence is going to escalate significantly. They are pulling vulnerable civilians out of the theater before the next shoe drops.
And as we try to map the physical reality of this war, we also have to navigate the parallel battlefield, which is the information war.
The narrative war.
Right. The Ping AI brief includes a very specific, highly charged data point that we need to dissect here. It highlights a report originating from TASS, the Russian state news agency.
Okay.
This report claims that debris from U.S.-marked Tomahawk cruise missiles was found at the site of an Iranian girls' school.
This is a fascinating inclusion in the intelligence brief, and it really requires careful analysis.
It does. And before we dive into the mechanics of this, let's just look at this purely as analysts. Given that TASS is a state-controlled media apparatus of the Russian government, we are looking at this report strictly as a piece of the broader intelligence landscape.
Yes.
We are reporting on its existence in the data feed as a prime example of how information is weaponized in real time. We are not treating the claim as a verified kinetic fact. We're not endorsing it. We are simply examining how the narrative itself functions as a tool of the conflict.
That distinction is absolutely vital. In modern warfare, controlling the narrative is a strategic objective on par with destroying a runway.
It really is.
The reason this CAS report surfaces in a high-level intelligence brief is because it illustrates the deployment of escalating propaganda. Claims involving strikes on highly sensitive, emotive civilian targets like a girls' school are engineered for maximum psychological impact.
They're designed to provoke.
Designed to galvanize Iranian domestic resolve, which might be wavering under the economic strain of the bombing. They are designed to outrage international audiences and fracture the diplomatic coalitions supporting the U.S. and Israel.
So the truth of the claim almost doesn't matter to the objective.
Right. Whether that missile debris is real, whether it was planted there after the fact, or whether it was entirely fabricated out of thin air, the mere existence and circulation of the report is a weapon.
Forces a reaction.
It forces the U.S. into a defensive posture, forcing them to spend time and diplomatic capital denying a war crime rather than focusing on the operational momentum.
It creates a fog of war that is almost impossible for you, the average citizen, to see through. So looking at the board as it stands right now, with the embassy compound in Riyadh smoking, the base in Erbil hit, NATO intercepting missiles over Turkey, and the information space flooded with Russian amplified propaganda, what is the path forward here?
The immediate path forward hinges on one word: containment. How does the United States respond to the strikes in Riyadh and Erbil? The impulse will be to launch a proportional counterstrike to reestablish deterrence.
But proportionality is tricky.
The problem is that proportionality is incredibly subjective. A strike meant to deter can easily be interpreted by Tehran as another escalation, triggering another salvo, and suddenly you are in an uncontrollable spiral.
Right.
The U.S. command have to decide whether to absorb this asymmetric blow in order to keep the war confined to its current borders, or retaliate and risk opening a wider regional war.
And the brief explicitly warns us about the ultimate asymmetric lever Tehran still holds. We need to keep a very close watch on the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, that is the global economic choke point.
It's what, a 21-mile wide waterway?
Roughly,
Yeah.
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 Just between Oman and Iran. And 20% of the world's total global oil consumption passes through it.
20%.
If Tehran feels that its conventional military is truly 80% gone and they have nothing left to lose militarily, attempting to mine or blockade the Strait of Hormuz becomes their most potent remaining option.
It would essentially be taking the global economy hostage. The marine insurance rates for commercial shipping would instantly skyrocket, making it financially impossible to move tankers through the Gulf.
They'd be trapped.
Ships would have to reroute thousands of miles around the Horn of Africa, causing massive supply chain delays and an energy crisis that would make the current market shocks look mild.
It's a terrifying prospect.
But while the world's attention is locked on the U.S.-Israel-Iran axis and the threat to the Gulf, there is a massive bleeding secondary theater that is already tearing a nation apart. Let's look at the parallel war happening right now between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
It is a testament to the sheer scale of the conflict in Iran that the situation in Lebanon isn't the sole dominant headline on every network right now.
It's pushed to page 2.
In any other year, this would be the primary focus of the entire international community.
The numbers coming out of Lebanon are devastating. The brief details an intense campaign of Israeli airstrikes focusing on Hezbollah strongholds. The primary targets have been the Bekaa Valley, which is a major logistical corridor.
And specifically
Aru, right, the southern suburbs of Beirut. The casualty reports are grim and highly volatile. The source notes that the death toll ranges from 123 to 486, with over 1,300 people wounded. And embedded within those numbers, there are over 200 confirmed Hezbollah fighters who have been killed.
When we look at the strikes in the Dahi, we are looking at the brutal complexities of modern urban warfare. The Dahi isn't just a military base. It is a dense, bustling residential and commercial district.
Families live there.
But it is also the administrative and military nervous system for Hezbollah. The intelligence indicates that these airstrikes are highly calculated attempts to decapitate IRGC command nodes that are deeply embedded within that civilian infrastructure.
Tactically, you can see the logic. If you take out the command nodes, you blind the adversary. You disrupt their ability to coordinate rocket barrages, and you sever their direct communication lines to Tehran.
That is the tactical goal, yes. But the strategic risk of executing that in a place like Beirut is monumental.
It's the Dahieh doctrine.
Exactly. The Dahieh doctrine, as it is often called, involves applying overwhelming force to military assets hidden in civilian areas. The resulting massive civilian toll, the flattening of residential apartment blocks, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure risk triggering a severe, broader Arab backlash.
It alienates the neighbors.
It puts immense pressure on governments in Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf to distance themselves from the U.S. and Israel, potentially unraveling the fragile diplomatic architecture that has held the region together for the last decade.
And the tragedy of this secondary theater goes both ways, with civilians bearing the ultimate cost. The brief highlights a truly heartbreaking incident that threatens to ignite an entirely different kind of fire. A Hezbollah rocket strike recently hit the town of Majd al-Shams up in the Golan Heights.
Yeah.
That strike killed 12 children from the Druze community.
That specific incident is an incredibly dangerous flashpoint. The Druze community is a distinct ethno-religious group with a unique, deeply cohesive identity that spans across the borders of Lebanon, Syria, and Israel.
They cross all the lines.
Exactly. When you have a tragedy involving children, particularly from a minority community with those kinds of cross-border loyalties, it instantly inflames sectarian tensions.
It changes the nature of the conflict. It moves it away from a geopolitical chess match about command nodes and nuclear thresholds and turns it into something deeply visceral, communal, and fueled by a demand for immediate blood vengeance.
It becomes personal.
It hardens the resolve on all sides and makes the idea of finding a diplomatic off-ramp nearly impossible.
It fuels what we are seeing evolve in Lebanon right now, which is a textbook war of attrition.
Right.
Despite taking heavy losses, including those 200 confirmed fighters and the strikes on their command centers, Hezbollah is maintaining a persistent, ongoing rocket fire into northern Israel.
They aren't stopping.
They are not capitulating. A war of attrition isn't about capturing territory or achieving a swift, decisive victory. It is about grinding your opponent down.
It's a waiting game.
It is about seeing whose society, whose economy, and whose political will collapses first under the psychological and physical weight of constant, unending bombardment. Hezbollah is signaling that they are prepared to bleed for a very long time, and they intend to make Israel bleed with them.
And the fallout from this grinding attrition is a staggering humanitarian catastrophe. Nearly 700,000 Lebanese people have been displaced amid these ground pushes and airstrikes.
It's hard to even picture that.
Just try to wrap your mind around that number for a second. 700,000 people, that is roughly the entire population of Seattle or Washington, D.C., forced to flee their homes, packing whatever they can carry, and running from a war zone in a matter of days.
And just to give a full, comprehensive picture of the regional suffering, the Intel brief also notes a newly released Relief Web report regarding the ongoing Gaza humanitarian crisis.
Right, which is still ongoing.
The report specifically emphasizes the compounded harms, the lack of medical care, and the devastating, disproportionate impacts falling on women and girls in that zone. The entire region is fracturing under the weight of displaced populations.
The logistics of displacement on that scale are terrifying. You have 700,000 people who suddenly need clean water, shelter, medical care, and sanitation in a country whose economy was already teetering on the edge of total collapse before the first bomb dropped.
So what is the path forward for those people? Where do they go?
The brief points our attention toward the borders. In the coming weeks, the critical metric to watch is the potential spillover of these displaced populations into neighboring Syria or Jordan.
But neither of those countries is remotely equipped to handle a sudden, massive influx of traumatized civilians.
Not at all.
Syria is still fractured by its own civil war, and Jordan's infrastructure is already strained by previous refugee crises. Pushing hundreds of thousands of people across those borders could create entirely new waves of destabilization.
It is a domino effect. When you break the infrastructure of one nation, the weight falls on its neighbors.
Yes.
But what is crucial to understand about the modern world is that those dominoes do not stop at the borders of the Middle East. The ripples of instability travel outward through the global system.
Which brings us to a really fascinating section of the Ping AI brief.
It really is. It doesn't just isolate its analysis to the kinetic war zones. It actively tracks how these massive geopolitical shifts collide with daily domestic life across the globe.
Okay.
We are going to transition away from the Middle East for a moment and look at some seemingly unrelated disruptions in Europe and North America because they perfectly illustrate just how interconnected and brittle our world truly is today.
This is where we examine the concept of compounding strains on national logistics. Global supply chains operate on a just-in-time model.
Very little margin for error.
There's virtually no slack built into the system. So when multiple disruptions occur simultaneously, even if they're completely unrelated geographically, the impact multiplies.
Let's look at the European data first. The brief flags a major nationwide security staff strike scheduled to hit Belgium. This is labor unrest over pension reforms, and it is projected to completely shut down all departing flights at Brussels Airport on March 12th.
Brussels is a massive critical hub for European travel and diplomatic transit.
Right. Paralyzing it right at the peak of spring travel demand is going to cause a massive backlog of flights, stranded passengers, and delayed air freight across the continent. On top of that, the brief notes a geological event. A magnitude 6.0 earthquake struck in Italy, 373 kilometers deep, just southeast of San Angelo.
Now, you might look at that earthquake data and wonder why it matters in the context of a global intelligence brief.
Seems random.
A 6.0 magnitude earthquake is significant, but at a depth of 373 kilometers, the actual surface damage is going to be minimal.
I really feel it.
However, the depth isn't the point. The resource allocation is. An event of that magnitude in the Mediterranean requires immediate, extensive seismic monitoring.
Right.
It pulls scientific attention, emergency management resources, and government focus toward disaster readiness. It forces the Italian government to run structural checks and deploy civil defense units just in case there are shallow aftershocks.
It consumes bandwidth.
Exactly. It consumes bandwidth in a region that is already politically tense.
It is a distraction of critical resources. And then you look over at North America, and the disruptions continue to stack up. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, has issued multi-day blizzard warnings blanketing the Pacific Northwest.
Heavy snow.
We are talking about heavy snow, whiteout conditions, and severe winds across Washington's Cascades, the Olympic Peninsula, and western Chelan County running right through March 12th.
And as if weather wasn't enough, a bomb threat recently triggered a massive ground stop and a full evacuation at the Kansas City International Airport.
This is the exact definition of compounding risks. Let's break down how this cascades. You start with the baseline weather disruption. Heavy snow and blizzard winds in the Cascades mean that major travel arteries like Snoqualmie Pass are likely closed.
That instantly halts commercial trucking.
Right.
It threatens regional power grids with down lines, and it freezes local supply chains. Now, you take that physical meteorological friction and you add the domestic tension spikes. A bomb threat at a major hub like Kansas City doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right. It happens in a climate of intense national anxiety. The war in Iran is dominating every screen, threat levels are elevated, and people are just on edge. That ambient geopolitical stress bleeds directly into domestic security postures.
Precisely. A threat that might have been quietly investigated a year ago now triggers a full ground stop because the perceived risk is so much higher.
Everyone is on hair trigger alert.
So look at the system as a whole. You have heightened security protocols slowing down domestic air travel. You have blizzards physically halting freight trucks and trains in the Pacific Northwest. You have a labor strike freezing one of Europe's most important transit hubs.
And sitting on top of all of this, you have the massive geopolitical supply chain shock we discussed earlier.
Burning Iranian oil sites, driving up global shipping and fuel costs.
When you stack all of these friction points on top of one another, national and global logistics face severe compounding strains. A delayed oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz meets a grounded diplomatic courier in Brussels, which meets a halted freight train in a Washington blizzard. The entire system becomes incredibly brittle.
It does. And the path forward here requires watching for contagion. The brief specifically warns analysts to monitor the labor unrest in Brussels. Will that strike action remain localized, or will it jump the border?
Right, if transportation unions in France or Germany decide to strike in solidarity.
Or seize the moment to push their own contract disputes.
Yeah, it would further destabilize European Union stability during a deeply vulnerable time. It requires extreme vigilance to see where the next link in the chain might snap.
And understanding those connections is the difference between being surprised by a shortage at the grocery store and actually understanding the global mechanics that caused it.
Now, I want to bring up one of the most surprising and frankly surreal facts from this entire Ping AI brief. We spent the last 45 minutes talking about cruise missiles, burning oil fields, mass displacement, and compounding logistical failures.
But the brief flagged a wildcard event.
A total wildcard. It feels like it belongs in a science fiction novel, yet it is happening right now in the courts. A family in Canada is currently suing the tech company OpenAI over a tragic shooting. And the core allegation of their lawsuit is that the artificial intelligence had foreknowledge of the attack.
Foreknowledge. This is a truly profound legal and philosophical development. We really need to unpack the sheer weight of what this lawsuit is suggesting.
It's heavy.
When a legal entity claims that a predictive text engine, a large language model, had foreknowledge, what does that actually mean in a court of law? Does it mean the AI observed search histories, chat prompts, or patterns in the shooter's data and failed to flag a high probability of violence?
Or does it imply something deeper?
Right, something much more legally fraught about the AI's supposed understanding of human intent.
It breaks your brain a little bit to think about it. If someone is using an AI as a sounding board and the prompts become increasingly dark or specific about a location, does the AI know what is going to happen?
And that leads to the massive question of liability. The legal implications of this are just beginning to surface. If an AI can predict an event based on the massive amounts of data it processes, does the creator of that AI, the tech company, have a legal duty to warn the authorities?
Duty to warn is a huge legal hurdle.
If they don't, is the algorithm, and by extension the corporation, legally complicit through inaction? We are currently trying to apply 20th century legal frameworks, things like Section 230, which protects platforms from user-generated content, to 21st century technological realities where the platform itself is generating analysis and prediction.
The friction between those old laws and this new reality is going to be immense.
Unprecedented.
And the irony here is just incredible. Think about the exact process we are engaged in right now on this deep dive. We are currently relying on an AI intelligence tool, the Ping AI platform,
which ingests data from 36 live feeds.
Right. It filters out the noise and presents a coherent analysis of a global war. We are trusting this AI to understand incredibly complex geopolitical conflicts, to map out the strike radius of an IRGC base, and to predict where the logistical dominoes will fall across Europe and North America.
But simultaneously, out in the real world, the companies building these very same AI models are facing immense legal fallout over what their algorithms ostensibly know about human violence on a microscale.
We trust the AI to map a sprawling theater of war, but a family is suing it because it failed to stop a local tragedy.
It perfectly highlights the paradox of our modern reliance on these systems. We desperately want the omniscient synthesate view they provide to help us navigate a chaotic world.
But we have absolutely no societal consensus on who is responsible for the knowledge those systems generate.
None at all.
So, as we pull back from all of this data, let's synthesize what we've learned over the past hour. The overarching theme of today's deep dive is undeniable. Day 11 of Operation Epic Fury has fundamentally changed the geopolitical map.
The era of the proxy war is effectively over. We are in a direct, great power confrontation that has degraded massive amounts of military hardware, disrupted global energy markets, and cost thousands of lives.
And as we look at the path forward, the key indicators you need to watch are very clear. Keep your eyes on the Strait of Hormuz. Any attempt by Iran to execute an asymmetric economic disruption by threatening commercial shipping will instantly escalate the global stakes.
Watch closely how the U.S. command responds to those drone strikes on the embassy in Riyadh and the base in Erbil. Their decision will dictate whether this war is contained or expands.
Monitor the humanitarian spillover in the Middle East. 700,000 displaced Lebanese civilians moving toward fragile borders in Syria and Jordan is a crisis that will reshape the region for a generation.
And finally, pay attention to the resilience of our own domestic supply chains. Watch how they hold up under the combined, compounding weight of blizzards in the U.S., labor strikes in Europe, and energy volatility abroad.
So, what does this all mean for you as you go about the rest of your week? It means you need to stay vigilant. Practice critical thinking as these flashpoints evolve, literally hourly.
Right.
When you see a headline about a delayed flight or a spike in gas prices, remember the mechanics we discussed today. Understanding the broader context, seeing how the blizzard in Washington connects to the burning oil facility in Tehran is your ultimate antidote to feeling overwhelmed by information overload. It transforms anxiety into awareness.
Because knowledge is most valuable when it is deeply understood and practically applied. Context is the only way to navigate complexity.
It really is. And we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over on your own today. We just spent time discussing the OpenAI lawsuit regarding an algorithm's foreknowledge of a shooting, and we spent this entire hour using the Ping AI tool to dissect the strategy of a global war.
Think about the trajectory of this technology over the next 5 years.
Right. If artificial intelligence is now capable of digesting 40 geopolitical flashpoints across 36 live feeds in real time, if it can predict supply chain ripples, assess the degradation of a missile arsenal, and monitor global wars with this level of startling accuracy.
At what point does AI transition from simply monitoring the conflict as a tool for analysts to actively shaping the strategic decisions of the generals fighting it?
That is the defining question of the next era of warfare. Are we using the tool, or is the tool beginning to direct the war?
It's a sobering thought.
Something to think about the next time you look at a feed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and we will catch you next time.